So now that we've discussed these fascinating and different communication systems in animals, I just want to reiterate that these are not examples of language. And I'm not saying this as a value judgment just to put humans on some kind of pedestal and say, oh, we're so much better than other animals. What I'm saying is, different animals have evolved communication strategies that are fitted to their specific evolutionary niche. Some animals are equipped with very rudimentary forms of communication that are fixed and genetically determined. Some are given the ability to be able to communicate more flexibly and to be able to adapt to the environment a little bit better in communicating with their conspecifics. What we need to understand is that the methods of communication that different animals use across species are those that are best equipped to meet that species' needs within their evolutionary environment. Humans have the same true for them. We developed language for evolutionarily advantageous reasons. Early on, certain predispositions toward language were selected for. We had a form of rudimentary language that became more and more sophisticated over time as it increased our fitness in our particular environment. So then we might ask the question, how are these forms of animal communication different than human language? Is it just a matter of degree? Like, are we just using it more often or better at it? Or is our language qualitatively different from their form of communication down to its very core and its very nature? In answer to that question, we have to say it depends on which animal we're comparing human language against. Because some animals have forms of communication that look nothing at all like human language, and some are actually quite a bit more like human language because they're more flexible, more generative, they're able to create different kinds of, to communicate new things, novel ideas that have never been communicated before, and these things look a lot more like what we would call language. So how are we defining language? What does that mean? Well, Charles Hockett, an early researcher on language back in the 1960s, 70s, designed a set of features that he felt like needed to be present in order to call something a language. And these are listed in box 2.1 in your textbook. As you look across those features, all of those things need to be present in order for us to call something language. And there are examples of animal communication, like you'll see in this table, that illustrate some of Hockett's features, but because none of these examples of communication illustrate all of Hockett's features, we can't say that any of these forms of communication are actually akin to language. So then we might ask the question, why don't animals have language? Indeed, the reason why they don't have language appears to be for perhaps multiple reasons, but there have been different hypotheses about this, and I want to talk about kind of each one in turn. So the first one is that maybe they have poor intelligence. There's some reason to suspect that that might not be the case, that's a problematic supposition. For instance, some animals actually can learn language with human interaction. They're capable of mastering, like, maybe the level of a toddler type language when they're raised as if they were human infants and they're taught certain signs to use. Then they're able to pick up on these things. Some birds are able to learn words, as you saw in earlier videos. And if you're able to pick up certain language, then, I mean, I put that in quotes because it's not a full-blown language, but it is like toddler-esque language. And some might wonder, well, if they're capable of that, then maybe it's not a problem with intelligence. And indeed, many animals can actually understand much more than they can speak, which again suggests that maybe it's not a problem of intelligence. On the other hand, there are some more complex cognitions that may be lacking. For instance, even when animals can understand more than they can speak and when they can master certain rudimentary forms of language, they do lack syntax, and they struggle to create sentences or understand sentences that have multiple clauses and that are especially long and that communicate multiple things all at once. So maybe it is about intelligence, but it could also be about a poor ability to articulate or to create the sounds. Indeed, apes must use signs rather than speech sounds because, as you'll see in figure 2.4 later in the chapter, they have a different throat structure that disables them from being able to create the multitude of different types of sounds that humans use when they're communicating orally. But birds do have fantastic articulatory abilities, and they just don't use them for language. They use them for elaborate mating rituals, and that kind of suggests that maybe it's not about the ability to articulate, because birds who have very high levels of intelligence, marvelous memories, and creative problem-solving abilities, and also fantastic articulatory abilities, you'd think that they would be able to develop language, and yet they haven't. So some have wondered, why is that? Why do, for instance, birds that have both the intelligence and the articulatory abilities not still develop language? And some scientists think that the reason might be because they have very low social needs. Humans live in large, interdependent groups. I, for instance, work as a researcher and a teacher to be able to earn money so that I don't have to do all of my tasks for daily living on my own. I don't grow my own food or kill my own meat. I don't create my own electricity from day to day or plumb my own well. I do a specific specialized task, and other people in the community do their specialized tasks, and we all live in an interdependent way that would not be possible if it were not for language. And the more sophisticated our language becomes, the more capable we are of interdependent living. But birds are relatively isolated and don't really rely on each other in highly complex societies, which means that they probably don't have pressures that would select for their development of language, even though they have the capacity to develop language.